Good evening, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're in the world. My name is Sairam Krishnan. I lead corporate marketing here at Freshworks, and I'm very glad and delighted to be hosting this webinar. I'm also delighted to be introducing Colin Shaw, who's going to talk us through this, who's going to talk us through how you're going to take your CX to the next level in 2019. It's a very important topic, something that's very close to us, and that's why we are hosting this webinar. And Colin is one of the most recognizable faces in our domain. He's been recognized by LinkedIn as one of the world's top 150 business influencers. But more importantly for us, Colin is also the CEO and founder of Beyond Philosophy, his consultancy that's dedicated to customer experience. It's something that we use as reference also at times, and that's why he's here. He's also the author of 5 books on customer experience, and I'm sure we're going to learn a great deal by listening to him. Apart from that, there are a few things that I will talk you through at the end of the webinar and in between. And feel free to ask me questions and ask us questions throughout. I'll make sure that Colin gets those questions and he's able to answer them at the end or in between if the context is correct. Apart from that, if there's anything else, do ping me and use the chat to your advantage. Send me a question, send more. And I think we're good. Colin, you can take it away.
Great, good. Thank you very much, Sai. And good to be here and talking with you guys on this subject today. This is one of I've been doing customer experience stuff now since 2002, so I've seen a lot of change, and I guess that's part of what I wanted to talk a bit about today, about moving your customer experience to the next level, because I see that as being a key part of things. So I think that we're at a bit of a turning point as an industry, and I love this image because this is what worries me, is that business people are sort of just going headlong over a cliff and they don't even realize it's there. So why do I say that? I say that because I read 2 pieces of research at the beginning of the year, one from Nunwood, one from Forrester, that basically talked about the fact that customer experience hasn't moved. So they have these indexes that they review with many different organizations. And it basically had been, Forrester's index had been flatlining for 3 years. And I think that there's some issues that are causing me some concern, the last of which we're going to talk a bit about today. But let me just sort of paint the picture. I worry that too many organizations are not really committed to improving the customer experience. And too many organizations are doing it just because everybody else is doing it. A key issue for me is that you've got to create a business case. There are too many people, again, undertaking improvements without having thought about putting measures in place, understanding the ROI, and so on and so forth. So when the CEO or the board turn around and say, you know, for this investment, how have we done? People can't tell them, basically. Third area is fiddling whilst Rome burns. This is effectively dealing with small things rather than dealing with some of the big systemic issues. And that's what I think is needed. Fourth issue is sort of ties into that as not being brave enough, which is, you know, some of the changes that need to happen are large. And if we are to improve our customer experience in 2019, I would encourage you to be brave. I would also encourage you to make sure you've got a sound business case. But the last one of these is what we're going to be addressing in this webinar, which is, I think the issue for me is that a lot of people are still using the same thinking that got them where they were previously. So for me, to improve the experience, what you've got to do is you've got to move your thinking to the next level. So if you want to move your customer experience to the next level, you've also got to move your thinking to the next level. And if you do, then as you can see from these organizations, there is lots of ROI to be had out there. So Merceline improved their net promoter score by 40 points over 30 months. That led to a 10% rise in shipping volumes. Rico, similar amount, 34 points over 30 months, led to a 10% rise in year-on-year sales in a shrinking market. So the opportunities are there, but you've really got to move your thinking to the next level.
Colin, just before you move on, I think we should ask our attendees also about what they are thinking about exactly these things.
Sure.
It's just a small poll about the same things that you brought up before, and let's see what our attendees think about it. It'll give us an idea of what it's basically.
Sounds good.
Question. All CX indexes haven't improved, and Forrester say they have flatlined for 3 years. And why do our attendees think that is? It's the same points that you just made, and I'm just waiting for people to tell me, like, why do they think that orgs don't want to make these adjustments? So please go for it, our attendees. If you can just vote for it and tell me what do you think. Wow, I think that there's going to be a singular winner here.
Okay, that'd be interesting.
Yep.
So do we need a drum roll?
I hope we don't. Let's see. Oh, there's a close fight here.
All right.
We'll just wait for like 30 seconds to
Sure.
Finish this off.
This is the trouble when you're now voting and nobody else knows what you're voting. It's not like you're in a room where you can see 90% of people voting one way.
Right, now you're going to see it in a bit, Colin. I'll send it to you. Right, I think that's about it. I think some of them are on the phone, so we're going to end this. And I'm going to share results.
Okay. Organizations not making the tough choices necessary to enable a better experience. Yep. Not really committed. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the most of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think if I looked at that last one, not making the change, the issue for me becomes people would be willing to make the change if they thought it was worthwhile. So if you turned around, and I'm going to exaggerate now to make a point, if you had turned around to your bosses and said, we can double revenue, clearly that would be silly, but I'm exaggerating to make a point. If it's attractive enough, they would probably do it. So part of this is going back to the business case. The other part of it is, a lot of this is around just not thinking in the new way. And I'm pleased that everybody has signed on today, because I hopefully by today I'm going to end up provoking some of your thinking. So let me start by trying to do that. So if you have a look at the screen, and I want to ask you a simple question. Imagine, or have you ever gone to walk down a darkened alley like this and thought to yourself, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe I shouldn't walk down here. And I think we've all done that. But the interesting question for me is, why did you stop? Because you may have been on the phone to your office. You may have been thinking about what you're going to be having for dinner that night. You could have been doing whatever you're doing, and suddenly you stop and you look down this alleyway and you think to yourself, this isn't a good idea. So what's happening here? Well, the first thing that's happening here is you're taking rational action. You're doing something. But the interesting thing is, what is it that you're doing? Well, what you're doing is the reason you stopped is because you're feeling scared. You're thinking, oh, maybe that isn't a good idea. But the interesting question then becomes, well, why am I feeling scared? What is it that make me feel fear or feel a bit anxious? And what you can where we start to move into now is what we call the subconscious experience. So the subconscious experience is, if you think about the fact that you are breathing, okay, just think for a moment the fact that you're breathing, and you can you're obviously now thinking, oh yeah, I'm just breathing in, I'm just breathing out. But before I mention the fact that you're breathing, you weren't thinking about it. It was in your subconscious, okay? I've raised it into your conscious mind by telling you to think about the fact you're breathing. And that's why you're now going, yeah, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. What's the point I'm trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is this. We human beings pick up subconscious signals. We pick up signals that tell us about the organization or the environment. And in this case of the alleyway, it's telling us that there are darkened doorways, there's graffiti on the walls, you can't see at the end of the alleyway, the walls are high, there's only, one way in, one way out, all those types of things. So the subconscious messages in your brain, what's happening subconsciously, you're not thinking about it. In your brain, what's happening is your brain's putting together all these signals, all those things I've just mentioned, and it's saying, Colin's just about to go into some danger. I better hit a button called fear. And when he then feels scared, he will stop walking down the alleyway. And that then brings into play the whole of psychology, the whole of fight and flight, etc., etc. So the point I want to make is this, that think about this now from a customer perspective. Your customers, first of all, here's a huge shock for you. Your customers are human beings, okay? And therefore they do rational things. They take action. They buy things from you. They phone you. They go onto your website, all those things. Why? Because they're feeling something. There's an emotion there. When they do those things, they then receive subconscious messages from you. Some things that you're aware of, some things that you haven't thought through. So for instance, you go into a bank and they put pens on chains that tell you that they don't trust you. That's a subconscious message. And lastly, there's this whole of this psychology. And this comes under these three areas and these three parts of an experience. And when I talk about moving your experience to the next level, I'm not going to be talking about rational things today. I'm going to be talking about emotional, subconscious, and psychological, because this comes under the heading called behavioral economics. Now, behavioral economics is a newish science, and it sounds quite grand, but actually it's very simple. It's about understanding how people behave and the effects upon money, okay? If I put it in a customer experience perspective, a customer phones you up, they eventually end up putting the phone down because they've been waiting for you for so long. Why do they put the phone down? Because they're feeling frustrated. Why are they feeling frustrated? Well, you've kept them waiting for 20 minutes and you've been telling them that your call's important to us. And that, from a psychological perspective, is using a thing called confirmation bias. So human beings look to confirm their view of the world. And lots of different psychology that we're going to be talking about. So this all fits in this whole of this area. And this was my last book, The Intuitive Customer, that I co-wrote with Professor Ryan Hamilton. And we now do a weekly podcast called The Intuitive Customer that you may want to dive in and listen to. But it's talking about this emotional, subconscious, psychological piece. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, because what I believe that organizations need to do to improve their experience is they need to start thinking about the customer experience from a different angle to be able to move your experience to a different angle. So we developed these 7 imperatives that I want to run through with you today about how to improve your experience and take your experience to the next level. So the first of these is that you need to recognize that customers buy emotionally and then they justify with logic, okay? So people buy emotionally and then they justify with logic or rationally, okay? Now, this applies in the business to consumer world and the business to business world. People in the business to, one of the most common questions I get is, does this apply in business to business? And the simple answer is yes, as long as your customers are human beings. If they're aliens of some description, it may not. But as long as your customers are human beings, then they still make rational, they still make emotional choices. We did, for my third book, DNA of Customer Experience, we did work with London Business School to identify which emotions drive value. Now, when I say value, I'm talking about improvements. I'm talking about more spend. I'm talking about all the things that I was mentioning before that should be in a business case. How much money are we going to make? How much market share is going to improve? How much costs are we going to save? And what we discovered was that there are these 20 emotions that drive or destroy value for an organization. Not going to go through those with you today, but these are really important. There's this destroying cluster, then there's an attention cluster. So attention cluster are effectively what marketing do. They try to get your attention by making the service interesting, exploratory. But then we move on to the recommendation and the advocacy cluster. So if you want to engage your customers, you want to drive value, then these are some of the emotions that you need to drive. Second imperative, embrace the all-encompassing nature of customers' irrationality. So customers are irrational. People are irrational. And you need to embrace that fact. So let me give you an example. In France, they did a test in a supermarket where they played French music in the wine store. And guess what happened to the sales of French wine? The sales of French wine went up by a ratio of 5 to 1. Okay. Now, if you had asked the customer when they walked out, why did you buy that wine? They wouldn't say, I bought it because they were playing French music. They would say, well, I just decided I'd purchase some. I haven't had some for a while, etc. The point being is that you can influence customers of what they are doing by the environment that you're putting them in, the stimuli that they are giving. Another example of this is in the B2B space. This is actually some work we did in India. This group of customers on the right-hand side here had ordered this piece of construction equipment. They had come along to pick that equipment up. When they came along, I was observing this happening. When they came along, they looked at the equipment, they looked at all the paperwork, and then they started to walk away. And I said to the dealer here, I said, well, what's the problem? And they said that the customer had come along and they looked at the serial number of this piece of equipment, and it wasn't a lucky serial number. So everybody knows that, 8 is a lucky serial number, or 8 is a lucky number, 4 isn't a lucky number. But the point that struck me was, and what I'm trying to highlight is, that's not rational. It's superstition, it's understandable, but it's not a rational approach to business. Okay, and that is a prime example for me of how people are not rational. We like to think we are, but actually human beings are very irrational, and you have to embrace that. Number 3, and this is really important, this one. Customers' minds can be in conflict with each other. So when customers are making decisions, and this is not just customer decisions, this is you making a decision at home, all the time. So all of these theories are human theories, not just customer theories. But we effectively use 2 systems. Okay, many people have heard people say, I'm in 2 minds whether I should do this. there's been talk about, you know, two minds for some time, and the intuitive system and the rational system are the two main systems that we use to make decisions. So the intuitive system is always on. The intuitive system is effectively your guts. You know, when you say, I need to make a you know, I made a gut decision on this, you know, I was faced with this situation and my immediate answer was this, you know, my impulse was to do this. You're using your intuitive system. You're not, in quotes, thinking about it. You're using your intuitive system. And you can tell when people are using their intuitive system because they start to say things like, it's obvious, it's clear, I just know this is right, you know, my guts tell me that I should do this. That's using their intuitive system. The rational system is thinking, okay? And the rational system is something you can control. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. The rational system is when you are self-aware, when you are aware that you are thinking, where you then go, I need to think about this, yeah? Or you say things like, I've been thinking, or let me sleep on it, or I need to give this a bit of thought, or, well, depends what you mean, or probably, yeah? All those things show that you're using your intuitive system, okay? And it's important from a customer experience perspective that we understand when a customer is using their intuitive system and when they're using their rational system, because clearly what you want to do is you want your customers to buy things intuitively. So the intuitive system is always on. As I've said to you before, it's got a large capacity for processing information. It's very, very fast. A key point here is it's effortless. It doesn't use energy to use it. It's good at parallel thought, so it can think about 2 or 3 things at the same time. Another important aspect here is it's associative. So what does that mean? What that means is that you can have you can go into a restaurant, you can somebody greets you at the door. They then take you to your table. They then give you the menu. They call you by your first name. They take your coat. And these things are you're starting to add up. And associative means at the end of it, when you turn around and say, was that a good experience or a bad experience? You're bringing all those things together to make that type of judgment. It's intuitive. The intuitive system is good at estimates. So if I said to you, you know, how long would it take you to fly from London to New York? You'd come up with an estimate. Yeah, it's good at logging instances, and it can be taught, but it's slow to learn. So, if you've ever driven home at night and thought to yourself, "I don't remember driving home," you've been driven home by your intuitive system. When you type, you are typing using your intuitive system. You're not thinking about which buttons to press, okay? On the other side, the rational system, small capacity, it's slow. Key issue here is it takes effort, okay? And taking effort is not good news. So this is where a lot of customer experiences fail because they cause too much effort towards the customer. It's very rules-based. It's good at precise calculations. So math is something that's good, is a good example. It can be taught, i.e. math, and it's fast to learn. But again, the key part here is this is really thinking, okay? Now, why do I tell you all this? What's the point? Well, the point is these are the things that I buy intuitively. I always buy Apple. I always go into a Starbucks. I always use my American Express card. I always fly Delta. Now, sometimes when I use these things, that could be to the detriment of me. Yeah. So it may be that I fly Delta and I could have flown somewhere a little cheaper. It could have mean that I could have done it in one stop as opposed to stopping over. But I just always fly, I always fly Delta now. So the important part here is that what you want to do is you want your customers to buy from you intuitively without thinking about it. So the decision to use your product or service should be automatic, not being thought about. And it's also important when you're designing your experience that you consider where these systems are being used. So if, for instance, let's assume I want to buy a watch, and I want to buy a watch and my intuitive system says, oh, this looks a nice one, this is fairly cheap. My rational system can now cut in, yeah? And this is where people say I'm in two minds whether to do something. Your rational system cuts in and goes, hold on, cheap isn't necessarily good. Let's look at a different brand, yeah, and see what they've got. And therefore, let's buy this one. So your rational system can override your intuitive system. But in certain conditions, that may not be the case. And again, this is important from understanding your customer experience perspective. So if your customer is tired, if they're distracted, if they feel hurried, if they feel stressed, if they are multitasking, and you ask them to make a decision, this is where some problems can occur. So let's assume I want to buy a new camera for a vacation that I'm going on. And my immediate reaction is, hey, let me buy a GoPro because GoPro's cool. If I'm feeling tired, distracted, hurried, stressed, or I'm multitasking in some way, my rational system may turn around and go, you know, I really don't have the energy to argue with Colin anymore. I just do what you want to do. Yeah. My rational system, intuitive system goes, woohoo. And off I go and I buy the GoPro. But here's the issue. The next day, when I'm not tired, when I'm not distracted, when I'm not hurried, when I'm not stressed, I then start to go, you know what, I'm not really sure if I should have bought this GoPro or not. And then the danger is I take it back. Okay. So understanding where your customers are and what system they are using to make decisions when you are designing your experience through things like journey mapping. When we do journey mapping, we look at all of these 7 areas and start to map where the customer is using their intuitive system and the rational system and these other areas. Okay, number 4. Number 4 is looking at the whole world of habits. So us human beings, again, we've developed habits, okay? A habit may be brushing our teeth in the morning. A habit may be the roads that we drive to work on. A habit may be buying a cup of coffee, whatever it may be. A habit may be I go in and buy the same toothpaste every week in my in my supermarket, and it's rare that people change that habit. Okay, and therefore, what do companies do? They want to try to break that habit, and therefore they start to put things like special offers. They put various different labels, as you can see here, to try to break people's habit from just doing the same thing week after week. But again, it's important that you understand where you are, where your customers are doing something that is habitual, and either you need to, if they're doing a habit that benefits you, that's great. If they're not doing a habit that benefits you, you got to change that habit and you got to get them to do something different. So how are habits formed? Well, there are triggers. Okay. So the first thing that happens is something happens that makes you say, you wake up in the morning and you go, I got to clean my teeth. Okay, that's the trigger, the waking up in the morning, going into the bathroom. It could be smelling coffee as you're walking down the road that makes you go, I'm going to go into a Starbucks. So there's the trigger, then there's the routine, in other words, what you do, and then there's the reward, so the benefit that you gain from that. So understanding the triggers that your customers have. So the key question becomes, what are affecting your customers? Where are they in the experience? What is their routine? And what is the reward? And it could be that a trigger is, as I mentioned, that I'm going past Starbucks and I smell the coffee. It could be that, and we've all experienced this, I think, you answer the phone, you hear a silence, and then you realize that actually that it's probably going to be a sales call, and they just haven't connected the agent yet. So that triggers you to put the phone down. Or it could be that you give somebody your business card when you meet them, and that triggers you to respond and give them your business card. So the reason that we've developed these habits, again, is to save energy. Okay, you know, if you go back 200, 300 years, energy, getting food was difficult, and therefore over the millennia, human beings have developed these types of processes to help with that, to help us survive. Intuitive and rational thinking, the habits that I've just talked about, all these things are there to save energy, which actually ties back to why customers want things that are easy, that are effortless. They want them that way because they don't want to use energy, because we used to find it difficult to find food. Okay. Number 5, uncover the hidden causes and unintended consequences of why customers want things to be easy. So again, it's really important, particularly in this age of digital transformation, particularly in this age of artificial intelligence, that we really think about the customer experience, and that we really think about a key phrase which I use a lot, which is what drives value. Okay. And therefore understanding, you know, how people are making choices. So unintended consequences. Let me give you an example. In Florida, I live in Florida in the States. Lots of lightning in Florida. Sends my internet modem out. So I decided that I was going to buy an uninterruptible power supply. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never ever bought an uninterruptible power supply before. And when I went on to Amazon and looked at the uninterruptible power supplies, here was the information that was given to me about uninterruptible power supplies. And to be totally honest with you, I don't have a clue what all this lot means. So the interesting thing is, how did I buy the product, therefore? Well, actually, what happened was there was these various things happening when I was purchasing this product. So first of all, there's a psychological principle called reference points. Okay, people use different reference points to evaluate things. Okay, you may turn around as a reference point and say, well, I think that an uninterruptible power supply would cost me, I don't know, $100. That's a reference point. It could be that you go, I'm just about to phone this insurance company up. I've never phoned this insurance company up before, but I've phoned up lots of other insurance companies, and this is how I've been dealt with. That's a reference point. The other areas that get into these decisions is one called the evaluability hypothesis. All of these are great. Academia really come up with some great names for these things. But effectively what this means is that all the things that they showed me about this uninterruptible power supply were pretty complex. But what's the thing that I could make a decision on? Well, the thing that I ended up making a decision on was how long would it last if the power goes out? So I'm making a simple judgment. So again, what are your customers making that judgment on? There's social proofing, which is things like how many reviews they're getting. So the more people that get 5-star reviews, the more likely I am to buy it. There's a thing called extremeness aversion, which basically says that human beings tend not to, if I have a decorator come around our house, we typically get 3 quotes. I tend not to buy the cheapest one. I tend not to buy the most expensive one. People tend to go in the middle, okay, because we don't like extremes. And finally, the halo effect. If Apple had come up with an uninterruptible power supply, because I love Apple, I would have just bought that one, because that would have just been simple, made this decision simple for me. So the point I'm trying to make is, again, you need to understand all of these types of things when thinking about and designing your customer experience. Number 6, accept the apparent irrelevant aspects of your experience may sometimes be important. And this goes back to this digital transformation. So let me tell you a story. This is my home in England, and this is my old dog Blaze, and you can see here, this was taken a few years ago now, but we used to get our milk delivered. And I said to Lorraine, my wife, one day, I said, why are we getting our milk delivered? Don't you think we should just go and buy our milk from the grocery store like everybody else does, because it's cheaper? And she said, well, no. She said, Kevin comes around on a Friday night. He comes around and collects his money. We always have a bit of a laugh and a joke. So no, I want to carry on getting my milk from Kevin. So fine, we're overpaying for milk, but that's fine. Kevin left because milk sales were declining. Kevin left. New guy came on board. New guy says, hey, I've got this new process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the receipt underneath the milk bottle, as you can see here. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to ask you to leave a check somewhere safe to pay for the milk, because it's much more efficient that way, and therefore, I don't have to call and collect the milk. Guess what happened after 2 months? We cancelled the milk. Okay. Why? Because the key interaction, which was talking to Kevin, having a bit of a laugh and a joke, was actually what was driving value. And here's my problem. My problem is today, I worry that when we're looking at digital transformation and artificial intelligence, that we are automating Kevin. We're automating the parts of our experience that actually are driving a lot of value for us and still needs that human interaction. So let me be very clear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be automating things. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing digital transformation. But what I am saying is you need to understand the parts of your experience that drive value for you before you do that transformation. And again, when we're doing research, those are the types of things that we uncover to try to understand what's driving value and make sure that we keep that. And that sort of falls into this 4-box model, which is, and customers will tell you this, this type of research. And in fact, let me give you this anecdote first of all. Disney know when they ask their customers what they'd like to eat at a Disney theme park, Disney know that people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads when they go to theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers. So here's the interesting part. What customers tell you and what customers do can be different. So in this 4-box model, down the bottom right, you can see here what customers say that they want, the desired. And on the left-hand side, you can see what drives value. In other words, what you as the organization get. So the things up in the top right are the conscious things, the things that you are conscious of, or your customer is also conscious of. They will say, I want this, and you can prove that it drives value. The two really interesting boxes are the deception and the subconscious. Deception is where customers say that they want something, you give it to them, and it doesn't drive any value. So they say they want a salad, you fill the parks full of salads, but actually nobody buys them. The other area is the subconscious, which is customers don't tell you that they want them, but actually it drives a lot of value. And typically, this is where the emotional parts come in here. So if you have a look at this chart, this just gives you a bit of an explanation, bit of an insight again to some of the research that you can look at. On the left-hand side here, we've got, this is a mobile phone company. On the left-hand side, we've got the attributes, the parts of an experience. On the right-hand side, we've got blue lines and gray lines. The blue line is what customers say that they want. The gray line is what drives value. So let me give you some examples. Here we have 3 examples of what customers are saying that they want. Big blue lines: reliability in network, quality of network, speed of problem resolution. Customers are saying, I want those things. But what you can also see is there's no gray lines. So in other words, you provide those things and it doesn't drive any value. But if you look up here, so that's classic deception. If you look at the top here, we've got things where they've got small blue lines. In other words, customers are not telling you they want them. These are subconscious things, but they've got long gray lines. So in other words, they drive lots of value. And these are things like positive presence in my local community. So the point I'm trying to make is this. If you have $1 to spend, where are you going to spend it? You're going to spend it, I would advise that you spend it on the things that drive most value. And you could be spending all of your time and effort on fixing the things that are wrong with your experience. So this goes back to fiddling whilst Rome burns, and goes back to ROI that we talked about at the top. You really need to be doing this type of research that then drives value. Okay, last one before we start taking some questions. Recognizing that the only way to build loyalty is through customers' memories. So this is really important one. There's a guy called Daniel Kahneman, Professor Daniel Kahneman. He's won the Nobel Prize for Behavioral Economics. And Professor Kahneman talks about the fact that we have our experiencing self and our remembering self. So our experiencing self is you listening to me now, today. Tomorrow, when someone says to you, oh, did you go to that webinar? Or what did Colin talk about? Was it interesting? That is using your memory of what we spoke about today. Okay. So an experiencing self and remembering self. So think about customer loyalty. You cannot be loyal to something that you do not remember by definition. So customer loyalty is about memory. So the next question becomes, how are memories formed? And what Kahneman talks about is the fact that what people remember in an experience is they remember the peak emotion that they felt, and they remember the end emotion that they felt. Now, the peak emotion could either be positive emotion or it can be a negative emotion. The end emotion can be a positive emotion or it can be a negative emotion. Think about your life. Think about the good things that have happened to you and the positive memories that you've got and the positive emotions that you've got, and think about some of the not so nice things that have happened to you in your life, and think about those negative memories that you've got or negative emotions that you've got. The point being that that's what we remember. So to gain customer loyalty, what we've got to start thinking about is what emotions are we trying to evoke in our customers, are these emotions the right emotions that will drive value for me, that I get a return? Where is the peak emotion in my experience and the end emotion in my experience? And how am I going to evoke those emotions? And all of this, therefore, ties into what we've been talking about here, which is moving your experience onto the next level in 2019. So these are the 7 key imperatives. I firmly believe that everybody should start to understand these, embrace these, build these into your experience, because this is what will make a difference within your customer experience. And certainly for me, the Freshwork products are an enabler to these things. So when I look at the suite of services that Freshwork provide, I believe that these enable you to implement these things and build that experience to the next level. So, Sai, any questions that have come through, or?
Yes, we certainly do. We'll go to them, Colin, right in a bit. But before that, I'll just run through why we're doing this and who we are and so on.
Sure.
And this, so as I said before at the start of the webinar, and before we do that as well, it's been a really great presentation. I've really enjoyed it, and I know that our attendees also have, because I've been having constant chatter as well as constant questions here, and this is one of our most engaged webinars that we've done. So Colin, we're glad to have you on here, and it's been delightful.
Great, it's been good being here.
Right. So as I said, my name is Sairam and I lead corporate marketing here at Freshworks. And the reason that we're doing it is that we are a customer engagement company, and we are really interested in making sure that our customers and other people around the world understand the value that customer engagement can bring to their organization. We have a suite of products that with our flagship product, Freshdesk, which is actually a customer support product, which and this entire suite of products is designed to work together in exactly the way that Colin said, basically to make sure the customer experience of somebody who's trying to sign up, somebody who's trying to use the product, is as exemplary as it can be. If any of you are looking for business software, I encourage you to have a look at the Freshworks website. It's freshworks.com. And we'll move on to the questions now, I suppose. Just a second, Colin. One of the questions is really interesting. Is Marcus Alexander was talking about the journey map.
Yeah.
If you could go a little bit deeper into that, Colin, what do organizations usually use to build up the journey map, or is there a plan, or is there a strategy? What do they miss out on?
Okay, yeah. So, journey maps are a fairly sort of proven methodology now, where you're breaking the customer journey down into the steps that the customer's taking. The key part here is looking at it through customers' eyes, not looking at it through the organization's eyes. So not looking at a process, but looking at what the customer does. And a good way of doing that is by putting that in customer language. So, I get in my car and drive to the shops. I park my car. I walk to the store. I walk in the store. All of those are different steps. Okay. And journey maps are that's all great, but I guess the bit that goes back to sort of moving the customer experience to the next level is that what I see organizations do is do those things from that rational perspective. But when we would do journey maps, we would do it from a rational, emotional, subconscious and psychological perspective. So we would be saying at each of those steps, how is the customer feeling? What emotions are the customer feeling? We would look at, okay, well, what subconscious signals are we as an organization giving off? I mentioned you go into a bank and they put pens on chains. What's the documentation like? Is it 27 pages of legal jargon that you're asking people to read? So what are these subconscious messages that you're giving? And finally, at each of those steps, at each of those points, what of these imperatives are at play. So, you know, what's the customer's mind like? Are they using their intuitive decision making or rational decision making? What behaviors and habits are they? So, you know, journey mapping's great, but I believe that it needs to be taken down to those next levels and to look into that in much more detail. So I hope that answers Marcus's question.
Yeah, Marcus was also asking about what software he recommends, what software you recommend for the journey mapping. Is there anything that you have?
You know what, I have to say, when we do it, we don't use software, because I've not found any software that goes into the detail that we would go into. So no, the answer is no, I can't advise any.
Right.
Sorry.
One of the things is that, Colin, why don't you fiddle around with Fresh Marketer? Fresh Marketer has a rudimentary journey map offering, and
Okay.
we'd like to that's our A/B testing software product. And if you could fiddle around with it, I think there's some rudimentary journey mapping that we offer that you could perhaps have a look and tell us.
Okay.
And we could give you some more info on that.
Sure.
And there's a follow-up question from Robert, and he is asking regarding the journey map. Would you prefer to test it with customers, Colin? Is that something that you'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, everything always should be tested through customers. A mistake too often that organizations make is they only look internally. I'm absolutely interested what people say internally, but absolutely I'm more interested in what customers tell me. So talking to customers is absolutely vital.
Thanks, Colin. Is there a kind of template that you have created for your journey map? This is Marcus again. And is there something that we should perhaps look up on the internet that you think is like a good resource for this?
If Marcus wants to go to our website, beyondphilosophy.com, then he'll be able to, we call it behavioral journey mapping, which is the process that we use.
Awesome. I think that covers the question, Marcus. There's one other very interesting question. Hold on. Right. In the question with reference points, Colin, in which you're talking about, in which way that what are the kind of things that you use as references for buying, right? Robert is asking whether branding could be a reference point that you actually consider when buying a product, or when you're designing, for instance, a customer journey.
Yeah, so absolutely. You know, I think the first thing to say that I was also trying to illustrate with the uninterruptible power supply example is there's never one thing that's happening. There are a number of things that's happening. So yes, a brand is a reference point, but it's also a brand there's a thing called the halo effect, and the halo effect is basically that. And let me give you an example. There's a company in England. The bank that we use in England is a bank called First Direct. And First Direct, I've always been renowned for providing a good customer experience. And I was presenting with the CEO at First Direct a little while ago at a conference, and he showed the customer satisfaction with ATMs, and he showed NatWest and Lloyd's and all the other banks in England, and running at customer satisfaction of X level. And 10 points above it was First Direct, and First Direct are a telephone banking service, and First Direct were about 10 points ahead. And the interesting part, as their CEO said, was the interesting part is that First Direct don't do ATMs. They don't have any ATMs. Okay, so what's the point I'm making? Okay. That's a classic example of sort of reference points, halo effect, and branding. Okay, what people were effectively saying was, even though they didn't know that First Direct didn't have any ATMs. If they did have ATMs, they would be the best ATMs that there are. Yeah.
Right.
And that's where, again, you're trying to get to. You're trying to, through your branding work, you're trying to ensure that all the things that you take on board fit underneath that brand. And I have to say, some organizations do a good job. A lot of organizations, it needs improving because the product or service they start to put under that brand lets them down in some way.
Right. And this is the last question we're taking. It's a follow-up question from Robert. And one of the problems that he's had as a digital agency is that customers limit themselves with what is already out there with the same respect that you're talking about, Colin. The question is that how would you open their minds about exploring a bit more, and what would be the kind of the value prop you'd give them?
I think what you've got to do is, I mean, the way that I always do it is just by talking to them about what they have bought and the reasons why they bought it. So by using, I hope some of the examples that I've used today, you know, particularly the milkman example, I think is a good one. By using a story, by getting the customer and pulling apart what that customer has done, this goes back to that thinking bit. You've got to actually educate your customer for them to understand that there's this whole new world out there to do with behavioral economics, understanding how people buy things. They have to understand that as well. So part of the job, and this is part of what we face as well, is educating our clients to move to the next level rather than just talk about the normal rational stuff. But when you do, that gives you a differentiator in the market.
Right. Thanks, Colin. Thanks. Okay. There are exactly 2 minutes for an hour, and I don't want to so here's just one simple tip before we end, Colin. How do you convince clients when they don't see the connection to the bottom line to improving CX? Like, very simple. What would be the top thing that you'd recommend that we do?
One of the top things I would recommend that they did was to get that, and I'm assuming it would be a senior person, but to get that person to experience their own service or to deal with a customer complaint. So you've got to bring it to life is effectively what I'm saying. So when we do, when we will go into a client and we will play back to them some of the experiences that we've had when we've been doing journey mapping, we would get customers to talk to them about that. We would get them to contact customers who have had customer complaints, so they realize the problems they've got and therefore buy into changing something.
Right. Thanks, Colin. I think that makes a lot of sense as well. All right, there are quite a few questions yet, and I'm gonna ask all our attendees to address them to me at sairam.krishnan@freshworks.com. I've sent you the email over there, and all you have to do is send me a mail, and I will make sure that if not, Colin, we'll address this. We'll address this from internally. And the last question again, Colin, how do you best reach Colin for additional questions? Colin?
So if you just want to reach out to us by going to beyondphilosophy.com, there's a contact us as usual on a website. So just go to beyondphilosophy.com. Right.
Thanks. We are gonna end here, people, because it's been a pretty engaging webinar. It's been very insightful, again, as Robert is saying. And I thank you, Colin, for giving us this much of your time. It's been a great session.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been most enjoyable and some good questions.
Absolutely, yes. Apart from that, if there's anything else, do reach out to me at the email address that I've just given you. We are going to send you the recordings of the webinar later, so don't worry about that as well. And if there's anything else, feel free to reach out. This is Sairam Krishnan from Freshworks signing off. And thank you, Colin.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.